Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.
I listened today actually to your duo you did with Tat Poor, which was like this for the university, some festival concert, and you guys are burning together. Like really, I mean, you have such a blind chemistry going on. And I wanted to ask you, kind of leading up to the latest quartet, but like, how did you meet Poor and where Tat Poor, and where does your story begin with him?
Met him in New York, and I started a trio with Stomu,
Yeah.
and we were looking for another drummer, and heard about Ted through word of mouth in New York, and he supposedly Ben Monder had been to Eastman and played with Ted, and was totally into him, and I think he was 19 at the time. 19.
Oh man, seriously? Oh,
yeah. So.
Wow.
Stomo told me, yeah, there's this really young kid from Eastman that Ben Monder loves, and so I knew like if Ben Monder likes him,
Yeah, exactly.
he can play complex time, he can do all kinds of stuff. So I had a session with him in New York, and he came down and we did a session, and Stomo and I were completely blown away. It was the first time. I mean, I'd worked with so many amazing drummers, but it
Yeah.
was really the first time that I didn't have to tell him, the drummer, anything that I wanted, and he just
wow.
filled in the blanks the way I was, not really the way I heard it, but he took care of what I needed to hear and then implemented his own thing. Whereas like before, there's this thing about maybe my generation and younger, where if the leader asks for a specific thing, they get offended. It's like, it has
Yeah.
nothing to do with your ability. It's just, this is how I'm hearing, and I want you to try to get this across. So that's one of the reasons why we kept on looking for another drummer. And Ted I never had to tell him anything. And it was and the chemistry with him and Stomu when they do their advanced meter stuff, but they're still able to then operate with me on another level,
Incredible. Yeah.
in a different space where I don't have to get into that complexity because I can't, and I can just work on what so it was a really great way for the trio. It was just the perfect way for me to work.
Yeah, I first heard him with Ben. Like I think he did that Oceana record. I think he's on that one already, with Schoolie, and he just nailed it there. It's just like I was also like, then the first time I first heard his name or seen his name, I was like, man, who is this guy? Like really killing.
He's a killer reader, so a lot of that he didn't have to really practice. And then
Yeah.
I heard him in other groups. This group called Jersey Band.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Playing metal.
Yeah.
So I was like, man, this guy can do it all.
Yeah, that's beautiful, especially for your music. I think that fits because you're like so genre. You don't care. I think it's all about music. When I listen to your compositions, it's just like you embrace it. So like that's what I love. So yeah. And I'm kind of leading up to your latest quartet with Bill. Also, that's why I'm asking about Poor. But I first want to ask you also about Luke Bergman, who before you, I know he did work with Bill actually. Then I think he's in harmony in his band also, right? And how do you see his role in your music? I mean, he's completely different than Stomo, although they're both incredible bass players. But how does your story with Luke begin actually? And
Luke is, to me, also another really special artist, special musician. And he was doing his last year of studies at the University of Washington when I started my first year teaching there. And I was already I was completely blown away by his musicianship and his opinion about music through the music, and he's just a huge lover of. He loves everything, and he's the vast knowledge of all different sorts of music. But I think that one year that we worked together, he as a student, then he kind of saw how I see things and learned how I thought about things. And so that was an easy way to get our musics to meld, and have a more of an overlap. But he's eclectic, but at the same time, as a bass player, he's definitely coming out of the bass, more of a traditional electric bass role, where Stone was kind of like, what the hell is going on here? You know,
I love that. Yeah, also,
it's
yeah.
totally awesome, you know. But they're totally different. But also Luke gets how I think and what I need to for my music to speak well.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and being a great musician, he and Ted have a really good hookup with how more, I guess, rock-based music, groove-based music, they have a pretty good understanding and chemistry in that sense too. And so it's like almost like their hookup is in that sense, but also they can make that work with how I play as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like a different version of Stomu and Ted, you know, completely different, but they're
Completely
able to
different.
do
Yeah.
it really well and fit into how I want to hear things.
Yeah, that's you basically described it. Yeah, like, it's like when I listen to Change in the Air, the quartet, it's like what you said, and I love it that you also you all contributed compositions. I love that.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
feel does it feel like a band for you, or it's still like a project you lead, or like how is?
It wasn't, I mean, it was never my band. You know, I did some gigs as a trio with Luke because Stomu lived in New York, you know,
Hmm.
and all over here. But then when Bill, the reason why we did that record, it's kind of a long, a little bit of a convoluted story where
Oh, please.
Bill wanted to do a concert. He was affiliate professor at the UW. So he wanted to do a concert where he brought in Michael Gibbs, the
Mhm.
composer, arranger, to do his music. So we did
Ah, that's how that one happened. That album, Ballet.
that first record, yeah. And
Yeah,
it turned
okay.
out the sets that we did, Bill thought were really great, and he wanted to release it. And I said, well, why don't I try to get a record to put it out instead of just throwing it on the internet? And Luke mixed it, and it sounded good enough, and we brought it to Giacomo, and Giacomo said, I love it. I'll put it out if you guys do a studio record afterwards.
Ah, okay.
Oh, gee, twist my arm, you know. So that's how that came into being. And so initially, it's more of Bill's project, even though he brought in Mike's tunes, but he didn't. I don't know how Bill works in his other groups, but he doesn't have a lot of direction. He really lets the musicians do their thing, and then I think he's able to control us through how he plays.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
he selects musicians who are going to kind of work with how he plays, and then he dictates through that way. There's no verbal, you know, instruction from
Yeah.
him. And
Did you
so
know Mike Gibbs's music before?
I knew a little bit, you know,
Yeah.
because so many people played his music, but I didn't know him that well. I didn't really
Hmm.
know
Yeah.
much more about him than he was this composer who wrote really cool stuff that
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
he played.
Sure.
So then when we did this record, I was not in the zone of this is my band and I'm going to write all the music. So I just kind of kept the same spirit, but we all contributed things.
Yeah.
And
It's
it was
so
kind of
beautiful.
hard to it was kind of hard because the each person's music was so different. It was really hard
Yeah.
to sequence the record to make it sound like a solid, like a homogenized record. But I
Yeah.
think the
But it is, yeah, definitely. It's so beautiful. Also, how you and Bill like blend together because
yeah,
it's like you seem to it seems like it's mostly residual, which is not like now like what shit 16 years ago or 15.
long time.
Already then I was like, man, you're like gelled together, which is beautiful.
Yeah. Well, that's also one of his amazing abilities. I mean, he
Yeah,
makes everything sound really good.
yeah. How did you how did you meet Bill, by the way? Did you just call him for that project, or like how does your story with Bill begin?
That's also it's an organic meeting where we played at a festival. I think it was called the Nancy Jazz Festival in France,
Hmm.
and we happened to play before him.
Ah, okay.
And he actually came to our set. He like skipped dinner to come see us play.
Oh, wow.
And while we were changing the stage, he said, "Oh man, I really liked what I heard, and um, we should hang out sometime. I was like, yeah, I come back to Seattle to visit my mom. He's like, you should call me up when you get there. So I was like, yeah, whatever. But I called him. He was like, yeah, come hang out. And we spent a couple days together, and it was
Oh, wow.
amazing because he's also one of my heroes, right? So
Yeah,
it
sure.
was
Yeah.
this magical meeting. And then when I told him that I was thinking about moving back, he said, "You have to move back, move back." And so as soon as I moved back, we started to hang out and play more.
Yeah, it's also what you bring out in his playing. His music is his music. You know what I mean? It's like it has his own flow, its own flow. But his sideman stuff is very rare nowadays to hear him do what he does with you. I mean, with this group, which is like, sometimes it reminds me of like, I don't know, 1989 or with the trio with Kermit or Joey when he just like goes like somewhere. Like, did this happen with you guys completely natural? Like those kind of improvised things? Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, he was a huge influence. Those early records were influential
Yeah.
to how I thought about music and what I wanted to hear. Um, but so actually, so before I moved back, I had a gig for the Earshot Jazz Festival here in Seattle. It's a pretty big,
Yeah.
2 months long. And I asked him to play with the band. And so we had like a really nice gig. Two days of heavy rehearsing. We had a really nice gig. And the first rehearsal we had, he was just kind of like not really participating, just kind of listening and play here and there. And after the very first piece, he said, "You guys are fucking insane."
That's the biggest compliment, right?
Yeah, and then from that moment on, I think after just listening to one piece, he knew he could do whatever he wanted, and so he found his way in.
Yeah, I love that. It's so rare. Like when I heard that you saw that record, I was like, man, that you did this record, the last one, changing the air, man, Bill going for it, and like so beautiful to see that. But I wanted to ask you, like when you compose music, like round and round, for instance, from the last one, kind of this rubato-ish thing. What's your process, or in general, like when I listen to your older records since Bound or whatever, or like, what's your progress usually when writing? Did you know that you're gonna write for Bill, Ted, and Luke, or like, what's your process in composition-wise usually?
Well, yeah, I always have the players' sounds and tendencies and aesthetic values of what I think their aesthetic values
Yeah,
are in mind
that's
while I
important.
write.
Yeah,
So
that's important.
I'm just following my instincts, but it's shaped by having them in my ears. Um, I'm not an accomplished composer that sits down and knows and figures everything and understands all that stuff. So I pretty much I've taken composition classes. I've thought about it a lot. I've read a lot of books, but I mainly just sit down and brainstorm by just writing a bunch of different things and hearing things, and messing around on the piano, and then jotting them down. And as you do it, then subconsciously, I think things start to formulate. And then once in a while, you might be working on one thing that becomes something else. And then if sometimes it becomes a whole piece.
Yeah.
More often than not, it doesn't. But then I'll put that aside when I run into a roadblock, and then I'll just do something else. So it's all about just brainstorming, and then going back and finding which ones resonate the most, and then the intellectual composition part starts falling into place, and you just make it into a coherent narrative. So there's nothing mystical about it except for that, just like improvising, I work on specific things, and then when I improvise, I just go with instincts.
Yeah.
And just listening and letting my instincts tell me what needs to happen. And so once once the brainstorming thing happens, and then I have enough material, I just try to piece it together. And I tell my students that I have to actively be empathetically listening to the material and not really asking, but like trying to hear what the material needs, what
Yeah.
needs to become the thing. So I don't feel like I'm manipulating anything. It's almost like I'm tapping into my subconscious and it's letting me know what needs to happen.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Yeah, do you change stuff then when you present it to the band sometimes, or?
Oh yeah, all
Yeah,
the time. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, okay.
when we're rehearsing, that's still part of the composition process. So that's why it's so unfair that I call any of that stuff my composition.
Okay.
They're adding so much change and things like that
Yeah,
to it.
yeah, it's good that you leave it. I mean, if you have a band like this or any band, I think it's smart also to be like, okay, guys, yeah, this is the initial idea, and
Yeah.
try to make your own bread out of it or something. So, yeah, exactly.
The only advantage I have, really being the band leader, is that I have last say.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, but you have Bill on guitar, and it's like, yeah, hardly
Oh,
anything wrong he can do.
it's totally cool. When we did, it's mostly residual. In terms of making the arrangements and the pieces work, there was a lot. Actually, there was a lot of instruction from me, but then it
Hmm.
it kind of felt like he wasn't. So I would say this needs this and blah 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 blah. We have to think about this, and then he just kind of look into the space and be like, oh, okay,
Yeah,
and then
I
we
see
play,
him.
and then it would get closer and closer. But then once we did a take and it wasn't anything close to what we wanted really, then we'd listen to it and then he's like, oh, okay. And then come back and the second or third take would be exactly what I
Yeah,
was looking
yeah, I love that what you guys like the first chitter chatter and those songs like compositions. I mean,
for. Yeah.
you know, you're just like over those three guys floating there, and they're just creating this space of their own. And I love that stuff. How you build that record arranging wise. Also, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So nice. But you mentioned Bill being one of your heroes, right? Uh, in what sense? Like compositionally, like those records, like Rambler and stuff like that, or
Everything. I mean,
or-
since looking on for hope,
yeah,
of
with
course,
Hank, yeah, and,
most of my formative years of getting into jazz was very much influenced by Jim Black. He was the one that turned me on to so much of this music.
oh really? Oh wow.
He turned me on to Bill as well, and that became a part of my regular listening from especially his early stuff. And
Yeah,
everything about it. I mean, just the first sound of that record is of Joey Barron's bass drum, right? Boom! And you're like, oh my god, just the sonic territory.
yeah,
Everything about it, And as a youngster, I didn't know what was going on. I just knew these sounds are happening. It's really attractive. It's drawing me in. It's mysterious. It's scary. It's all this. It's evil. And
yeah.
I just loved it.
It's funny
So
because there's no trumpet like in those. Well, yeah, okay, Kenny Wheeler is on Rambler, but like
yeah.
who were trumpet wise, like in let's say early '80s or mid '80s, your heroes? Like who were the first jazz guys that kind of blew your mind?
Well, trumpet players. Really, I only like I had a record that my trumpet teacher, a classical player, hipped me to, which is Clifford Brown's "The Beginning and the End."
Hmm.
I really love that record. That was my first real jazz record, and that Night in Tunisia solo. Like I could sing every note of that solo
Oh,
when
oh,
I first started. So that was the first one, and then after that, Wynton Marsalis. I totally
oh,
loved
really? Oh, wow.
completely,
Oh,
completely. But then I got into Michael Brecker, and through Michael Brecker, I got into Mike Stern. Yeah, and it's because of the youngster, I wanted to play rock music, but I'm stuck playing this weird trumpet jazz instrument, right? And then Pat Metheny, Bill Frisell, and so that I think the fact that they weren't playing swing and kind of
yeah,
adding a rock element to their stuff, or with Pat, it's not about rock, but it's about like this orchestral sound, and I really love that too. So it had nothing to do with the trumpet anymore. It
yeah,
became just
music.
music, and most of it was like I just wanted to somehow figure out how to play rock music, music that I grew up on.
Yeah,
And it wasn't until I got back hired by Pat that I went back and checked out again how to play more traditional swing and really getting specific about playing changes and things like that. But
Oh, wow.
before that, I was just like, I just wanted to be a rock musician.
Yeah. I mean, with Pat, that probably was kind of almost like that, right? I mean,
With what?
with Pat Metheny, yeah, like almost because he's such a huge. I mean, like the concerts were so huge, such a huge following. It's like that's what I mean.
No, I mean like rock, like
Musically, yeah,
Zeppelin and Nirvana. Like I wanted to have that sound, And but with Pat, he was the reason why I had to go back and really shed on my bebop playing again.
yeah,
Like way more than I had ever done before. And
sure.
so to be able to play how he wanted me to exist in his band.
I saw you guys with when you played with Pat in Udine
Yeah.
with that band. I remember. I will not forget. Like the audience was singing. We were, Italy and Pat Metheny group. That's like
Yeah.
it
That's
was,
a trip.
man, such an experience. Yeah, it's amazing. And I wanted to ask, I mean, I wanted to ask you later about Pat, but since you mentioned him now, uh, I know you've been active like when I guess you got the call. And I wanted to ask you this also, how did this happen actually, and what came, it's like one of those moments when Miles Davis calls someone, I guess, their generation. But how was it like for you? Because you played basically with everyone in the New York kind of creative scene, from Jim Black, Chris Beebe, Andrew D'Angelo, everyone. And what happened when Pat called you, like, and how did this happen actually?
Well, I had put out my first two recordings um, in the same year. The first CD was called Bound, and that was
Bound,
with
yeah.
Jim and Jamie Saft.
Yeah, I love that one, yeah.
Yeah, and Stomu. And then I did a trio with Stomu and John Hollenbeck. And Metheny, when I first went to his space, he had stacks and stacks and stacks of CDs of art, like all kinds of artists, like new young people.
Oh, wow.
He's always been the kind of guy that's always trying to find new jazz musicians to dig on and to keep up with what's going on, I think. And so he got those records, and then he told me that he tried to find as many records that I was on as possible to check it out.
Oh, wow.
And the reason why he actually found me in the first place was by accident, and this is in the early days of this kind of stuff, where he heard like on an internet radio station somebody playing one of my pieces and was like, oh my God,
wow.
who's that?
Man.
So then he did the search, found me, and then dialed 411 and said Cuong Vu, and it's like, oh, Cuong Vu, Brooklyn. So he just called that number, and there was his voicemail on the answering machine, but I hadn't checked it for like a week because I.
Oh, man.
And so then my wife said, "Hey, honey, there's this guy on the phone saying that he's Pat Metheny," and knowing that I'm a huge fan. And so I listened to it. I was like, "Well, that sounds like Pat." I thought it was a joke at first. I was like,
Sure.
"There's no way Pat Metheny would ever be calling me." But then it turned out that he did, and so I called him back, and he asked me to come to his studio, and we played duos. And
Oh, wow.
Said, I'd like you to audition for my band. And I was like, which band? He's like, well, the Metheny group. I was like, wow. So he flew in his band, and Richard Bonin and I came and sang and played. I did 2 sessions, one on trumpet and then one on vocals.
Wow, man.
After that, he asked me to be part of the band.
Yeah, it's not nice because trumpet is quite featured, like on those 2 records. I mean, he had like Mark Ledford before and but like in those 2, like trumpet is really many times like up in the front, which I love. How did you feel about that when? I mean, the first time when you stood, like, let's say in Italy with the Pat Metheny group on stage, how was that feeling like for you?
Well, I mean, even to go back further, the first couple of gigs that we did in the States were practice gigs because we didn't really rehearse.
Oh, wow.
It was really freaky. So suddenly we don't have a whole set of rehearsed material together, and he gives us the set list, and we get on stage and we do it. And she's like, "Holy shit!" I was freaked out. I was totally scared.
Oh, man.
you just follow the veterans, and everything worked out really well. And Antonio's killing, and he had been working with Antonio for a long time. So
Yeah.
our parts were easy; we just fit right in. But once the show starts and the light turns out, none of that stuff is processing. I'm just trying to be a good musician and
Yeah, be
listening,
there. Yeah.
blocking everything out until you have enough time to sit back and listen to people react. And then that's like, holy shit,
Yeah.
But outside of that, I don't think anybody who can function in this world would be thinking about, oh my God, I'm playing with my hero or this or
Yeah.
that.
Sure.
As soon as the lights turn on, everyone becomes equal. Everyone's digging their dirt, shoveling and
Serve the
working.
music. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I love. Yeah, I love Pat Metheny too. He was like, we kind of have the same heroes, like Metheny and Frisell. Those two are also mine. I mean, being a guitarist, but uh, Pat is known for his long tours. Pat Metheny group, like playing also for huge audiences. How was that also for you? Those long. I mean, my longest tour. It sounds a joke when you compare it to Pat Metheny. It's like 2 weeks. 14 one-nighters in Europe. Like,
Well, I
how
mean,
were those tours like?
these days, 14 days is a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
It's hard to get anything more than that. But when I first started touring, the longest tour I did was 5 weeks with my
Man.
own stuff. Um, so yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of stamina to do that, and it's hard. There's so many ways that it's hard, and so that's why somebody that is that huge has a cushy situation. We have really good hotels. We have the tour buses. We can
Yeah.
sleep on the bus. Food is always there. Blah blah blah. So, but just the idea of being contained on the bus or in the hotels and with the same people and doing the same thing every day, that gets really challenging once you pass the 3 weeks mark. And
Shit, yeah, can imagine.
the longest time that we were out consistently, because we would do a leg of like 3 to 6 weeks and then take 2 weeks off and then again. But I think when you saw us in Udine, it was part of a tour that was 9 weeks long.
Wow.
And that became surreal because we were playing 6 nights a week. That became really surreal. That was hard. I don't know.
Also for trumpet playing, I mean, right? It's quite heavy to play.
That's cool. The hardest part about doing that tour was that I wasn't playing enough, and so I had to practice before the gig, but not practice too much that I would waste everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I also had to practice singing too because I wasn't a singer, you know. So it was like most of my time was spent practicing singing and practicing trumpet, and then playing the gig. So
Man.
that was pretty tough. But the playing on the gig isn't really that demanding. I mean, playing with my own group is way more.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Then how did the dynamics change when you called Pat for your own project? I mean, again, it's like you bringing out the best of these guys in your own groups, like with Bill, like Acid Kiss, that first one. Man, Pat is doing again some crazy shit there on that song. But how was that process then when kind of you called him? How was the dynamics and the work progress?
Yeah, I mean that was hard. I mean so like I said, once the lights are on and we play, I can't regard anybody on stage as being a superior being to
Yeah,
me.
sure.
That you can't play. So that goes away and you just deal. But once the lights are off, I'm like, oh my God, there was too much of I was too deferential to him as a sideman until I had to play. So that feeling of him being the master and me being the student never changed until I moved to Seattle, and then the Metheny group wasn't working anymore. So I knew that I wanted to do a record with Pat, and at some point it would happen. And so I just practiced my ass off. I was like, I was practicing so much and just to get to the point where I wasn't going to feel intimidated to tell him what I needed from him. But then when we got to the studio and the rehearsals, I didn't have to say anything. It's the same thing. He didn't need to be told what to do because one of the reasons why he asked me to play in his band in the first place is because he liked what I did and understood what I did. So of course, him being the incredible musician that he is, he's going to just get in there and do what is necessary.
Yeah.
So I didn't need to, dictate too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was as cool can be. As a band leader, he's very specific. Like, do this, do this.
Yeah.
You
I
need
heard
to
that.
practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have your shit together. And on stage, sometimes if I played a bad note or a not so great solo, I'd get the vibe, you know. But when we're doing our record, he was as cool can be. He showed
Yeah.
up before anybody, and was already there like an hour before we even showed up to the studio.
Man, it's always with these guys like that. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, he was very generous, very, very generous. Both of those guys.
Yeah. That's amazing, man. Yeah. But I wanted to ask you, Kwong, also about speaking about creative. I listened like these days to many records I have with you on. I love the connection you had with Chris Speed.
Yeah.
The early records, Yano and Deviantix. Man, it's still nowadays. It sounds so fresh. And I wanted to ask you, how was your? I think you moved to New York in '94, right, or '95, something. How were those first years like for you in New York, making a name and establishing a scene? Who were the most important figures in that time for you?
Well, I was lucky because I knew Jim from high school. And then through Jim, I met Chris and Andrew.
Yeah.
And Chris,
So this connection happened. Yeah.
yeah, and Chris went to the New England Conservatory, and we found that we had a really nice chemistry from playing on other people's recital together. So I was like, oh yeah, this is great. This is a great sound. And then, so moving to New York, it was easier for me than I think most people. I mean, a lot of people. I talked to people like Tom Rainey or Brad Shepard, and
Yeah.
or whoever, and it's like they spent years before anything happened. But because I had those guys who had been there longer and established relationships, I just fell into their whole scene. And so in that way, it was easier. And then I hooked up with Bobby Crevett
Oh yeah.
through playing with Orange Then Blue, and he's in this similar scene, in the same cast of people. But living in New York and learning how to survive and all that stuff was hard. Outside of the music thing and meeting people and networking, which was the easiest part, the hardest part was just learning how to exist in New
Yeah.
York. Coming from here, um, that was the biggest challenge. But the music part of it was pretty easy because pretty much everybody's super cool. Everyone is really
Yeah. Sure.
boat. Everyone's really supportive, at least in the scene that I fell into. And then having people like Chris and Jim open the doors for me with their relationships was really easy.
That's important. Yeah. That you have someone in the beginning. Yeah. It's really hard otherwise. And when was the moment then for you I mean, I know you guys did Ragged Jack, right? With Jamie Saft, but when was the moment you decided, like, okay, let's make a debut as a band leader? I mean, like, speaking of Bound, how did that decision happen?
Um, oh, I remember one of the things that I learned from Tim Byrne, and this is one of those things. So I met Tim through Chris and Jim, and the reason why I even have conversations with Tim is because I cut his hair. He saw that I cut my hair, and he's like, "Hey man, can you cut my hair?" And I was like, "Sure." I cut his hair, and he gave me some CDs for cutting his hair, and then I would ask him questions about what he did and how do you make a name for yourself? What do you need
Yeah.
to do? How do you get gigs? And he was like, well, one of the things that's important from my perspective is that you need to be a band leader if that is in your DNA. And collaboratives seem to not work for him. Like a group nowadays, everything has to be collaborative, right?
Yeah, true, yeah.
Like, and I noticed this, like, so he was the one that said, you got to put out your own music. You have to be a band leader. You have to do it how you want. And of course, I heard things a specific way that I wanted to have done. And then also, I was trying to highlight my strengths and not expose my weaknesses, which there are a lot of. And so I have to present my own music to present myself in the highest way
Yeah,
possible. So those two things made it seem obvious that I had to do my own group.
yeah. Tim is the master of that. Like he had that empire, his own label, late 70s already. I played with him and I did this talk also with him, and like, yeah, he's the guy how to do it, like blood count and all that stuff. Man,
He's amazing. He
yeah,
really is amazing.
such a composer also.
Yeah,
And
completely.
and how did you decide for those guys? Like, I mean, when did you meet Stomu then? Like
I met
through Jim
Samo
or?
on a Bobby Previtt gig, and
Ah,
he
okay, sure.
stepped out for Lindsay. And as soon as I started improvising, it was like, oh my God, he's like playing everything I need to sound really good. And so after the gig, I was like, I've never had this kind of hookup before.
Yeah,
Play, and he was like, yeah, I felt the same way. So then, maybe 2 days later, we played duos, and we knew that we were going to make music together. And then from that moment on, I started to try to find other people that would fit into what we found by accident, our chemistry, and trying to find another one or two more people to fit into that thing. Even though we weren't sure what it wasn't developed yet. It was
yeah.
it was like there. It was like it's palpable. So that was another reason why I started to think I needed to do my own group too.
So you're comfortable. You were already in the beginning comfortable as a band leader. Like,
Um,
how did you progress through years? I mean, I remember my first band leading projects. If I think back now, like, yeah, you didn't do that. I didn't do that. I was like, man, shit.
there's always things to learn, and there's always things to learn about how to talk to people effectively, but also gracefully. So that's a lifelong process of trying to master that and in learning how to be a band leader. But when I was in high school, I ran our big band. So
Oh, wow. Okay.
the the yeah, I pretty much ran the big band, so I knew how to do it that way. And then I guess I'm kind of like always been very specific. If things aren't going how I think they need to go, then I'll step forward and be like, okay, man, we got to do it like this, otherwise it sucks.
Yeah.
And so all those things together kind of helped. And the only thing that I had to really learn was how to talk to people in terms of being cool and help, like starting to use psychology. Like, well, I can't talk to him this way.
Yeah. True.
Not like manipulative,
No,
but
no, no. I know what you mean.
yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
There's certain people like Stomu, I can tell him anything. I was like, oh, dude, that sounds like shit. And he's like, yeah, I know. But other people you can't say that to. So you got to be, I'm not hearing it so much that way. Can you try, And even with some people, you say that and they get pissed off.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
You have to learn how to do that.
Sensitive musicians, creatures. So. But did you through Stomo meet then Myra Melford also? Or how did that gig happen? I mean, I love that band, where the two worlds touch and all those records, man. That's such beautiful playing.
Yeah, the scene isn't that big of people, and then I think everybody starts to realize who they're going to probably connect with, and so Stomu and I had played together before he played with Myra, and then Myra got this band together with Kenny Wallison, Stomu, and we did a tour, and it was awesome. It was so fun. The music was so fun, and I felt like we played really, really well.
Yeah.
And it was a fun night. So then she started to use me more often. Actually, the first gig that I did, I was Dave Douglas's substitute because he couldn't make the gig.
Oh yeah, Dave played. Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, and I wanted also to ask you about Nguyen Le and his connection, because I've known Nguyen for 10 years now, and we also done this talk, and you played on overseas on one of his last records. And how did that connection happen? Did you guys ever play live, or was that like just a long distance thing, or did you actually do it live? Or
we did do a live thing. Oh man, it's so funny. So I met him maybe once and kind of briefly in Italy, and I don't know. There was something about his look and his image that I couldn't penetrate. So it was kind of like, "Hey, how you doing?" And that was it. There wasn't really a whole lot of talking. It was just like the Parisian hipster thing was a little bit too intense. I
Yeah.
couldn't really penetrate it. And then the way that he played was so fusiony. And at that point, I had moved away from that kind of sound. So there wasn't really a whole lot of interest. But then many years later, there's this Vietnamese TV show that's made by people in America that's broadcasted internationally for all Vietnamese people. So we were invited to do this special, and Nguyen was one act, and I was another act with
Oh,
Stomu.
wow.
And then they
Interesting.
wanted us to play one piece together. So he sent me the music, and we played his piece. And then after that, like a couple months later, he was like, "I really liked how you played my music. Will you play on this track?" I was like,
Oh,
"Sure."
wow.
And then after that, he asked me to do another one, and then he had a big, really huge gig in Vietnam in Saigon that he asked me to also do.
Oh,
And then
wow, really?
from listening to his music in that way, then I had a whole new appreciation for what he does.
Yeah.
Because I never really listened to it much before. And then, but then getting into it where you have to work on it and see what he's dealing with, it's like, oh my God, this is really great. This is really great. The way he's used the Vietnamese melodies and made it totally his own.
Yeah.
But still, it's fusion, but it doesn't sound like fusion. It sounds really pure to me. I don't know how he did it, but
Yeah,
it's
really
just
honest. Yeah, really honest. You know.
so, yeah. So that's how we met, and he's a super cool dude.
Yeah.
Uh, very generous as well, and just yeah, it's just one of those things that's really cool that happened.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. Nice. Cool. I just wanted to ask you to end this, Kwong, what's for the future? Is there something new being planned, or writing some new music, and for what? Really
Well,
curious.
my wife is an amazing classical pianist
Oh,
who,
really? Oh, wow.
although she's really great at standard repertoire, her love, passion, and she excels at playing contemporary music. Like she makes that music sound romantic. The
Yeah.
heart is like dry as shit, which I like. She makes it sound really musical. Like that's her ability. So we've never done anything together. So we're gonna do a dual record, but I'm not gonna. I might compose one piece. We're gonna have other people compose. So and then we're also gonna do some open scores. And so that's the next thing I'm working on.
Oh, that's
But
beautiful.
in terms of my own stuff coming out of jazz, I haven't had enough time yet because I've been working on my playing. Remember, I said before I have so many weaknesses?
Oh, come on. Yeah. Come on.
Well, yeah, there's so many weaknesses that I've been working on all these years that I'm starting to feel ready to do something. So once I feel like, okay, you can relax on the practicing aspect and now spend time writing music to frame it, to show, to try to present this. I think that should happen in the next few years. But it's being a teacher and trying to
Yeah,
be a good,
sure.
and now having to take care of my mother and being a father, all that stuff. I only have about 2 hours a day to
Yeah.
music. So right now it's all going into practice.
What do you practice since you mentioned like on which things do you work? I mean now like or in the last few months or
I mean, it's always the same thing. It's like it comes out of three camps: technique, chop like sound technique, time,
hmm.
and ear training. It's all the same thing. It's just like
Wow.
trying to get to the next level. Like when I play with Ted and Stomu, when they do their complex stuff, I'm like, I have no idea where you guys are. I'm just gonna play and do my best, and then they help me find my way back in, right?
Oh,
Or or like when somebody lays down a chord like that's functional. Like if it's more on the atonal side, I can easily do that stuff. But
hmm.
like when it's functional, it starts to become like it's easier to play wrong notes, right? So I'm totally working on that stuff
Oh, wow.
all the time. So I feel like my playing these days is like so much better than it was even from the last record, but I'm still not ready to present the next thing.
Mm.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's the same.
Yeah, that's so cool. So nice to hear the honesty and humbleness also, like, for such a great player who you are. So,
I appreciate that. I don't think it's humbleness. I think it's just self-awareness.
yeah, I mean, because we all struggle with this. I sometimes practice and I'm like, ah, man, shit, I sound the same. I play the
Yeah.
same. I'm like, man, what should I do? And then again, I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
So not actually. I know it will sound bad, but it's nice to hear that from you also. So it's like,
Especially
so
you get on YouTube and then you see like Jacob Collier doing this shit. It's like,
yeah. For instance, yeah, cool, great, Kwong. Thank you so much for sharing all this stuff.
I appreciate it.
I will.
Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.